All right. I am here today with Kristin, and we are diving into the discussion around perimenopause and menopausal nutrition considerations for the female athlete. So we definitely have a lot of clients that fall into this category. We get a lot of questions. There's quite a bit more literature and talk coming out in this area. Would you agree, Kristin?
I agree. I see it in my coaching business, run coaching, as well as nutrition. So we've got some good nuggets for you today.
Yes. Yeah. So before we dive in, I think it's important that we define what perimenopause is and what menopause is. I think for a while, and I think even in the literature I've seen where they're technically talking about perimenopause, but they use the term menopause. And so I think it's important we define what perimenopause is and what menopause is. So many of the symptoms that a lot of people say, oh, I'm going through menopause, I have XYZ symptoms, you're actually more than likely going through perimenopause and are not yet in menopause or postmenopausal. So perimenopause is actually defined as a 2 to 12 years before menopause actually occurs. And again, it's where a lot of the symptoms are occurring, like more than likely due to what we call the hormone roller coaster that's going on. So estrogen levels are going up and down and overall trending downwards, while progesterone is just slowly declining. So these relative ratios between estrogen and progesterone are kind of all over the board. So you may notice changes in your mood. Maybe you're getting headaches, migraines, your menstrual cramp pain might be increasing. You might have changes in your period, whether it's getting heavier or longer duration between, longer duration of bleeding, potentially some irregularity in your cycles. So maybe you go a couple months without it, or you're getting some unusual spotting between cycles, bit more trouble sleeping. So if you waken in the middle of the night, hot flashes, tender breasts, and then changes in body weight and body composition can occur during this time. Menopause, on the other hand, is actually defined as the cessation of a bleed for 1 year. So 12 months, you have not had a cycle. That's when our estrogen is finally kind of maintaining a consistently low output. And we're switching, or I don't want to say switching, but our estradiol, our estradiol was our primary hormone when we were menstruating. And now our primary hormone or form of estrogen is estrone. So we're kind of making a shift there. And those two hormones will have different effects on the system. And one of the things I think that we should mention is many times there's not like a true clinically defined test to test perimenopause or menopause. A lot of times, doctors, PCPs will go off of symptoms and what you're kind of explaining is happening. So do pay attention to those. I think many of the apps out there these days, you can log all that stuff in there. Some people might test for FSH, so your follicle stimulating hormone, if that's starting to ramp up, meaning your body's sensing that the ovaries aren't putting out any oocytes, so they're really ramping up that they're trying to continue to stimulate it. So we'll see a spike there potentially.
I mean, I think that's the gold standard test as far as like, if I have a client that's, continuing doing the same things that they've been doing as far as exercise and diet, but noticing they're having a hard time losing that belly fat, or, feeling lethargic, having moodiness, sleepiness, I usually encourage them to go and have their FSH levels checked, because it can't be a good indicator of your hormonal status.
Yeah, I think too, getting a baseline sooner than later is important. So you have something to reference of when you were having regular cycles, what were those, normal quote unquote levels. So you have a reference to know what is high for you, can be helpful. So get your regular physicals, demand hormone test, get the lab work. So I think we mentioned several symptoms that many of our clients experience, and some of these things will affect, of course, performance in sport. I think the biggest complaint wanting help with is this change in body composition. The things that the client maybe used to be doing to maintain body weight really no longer are working for them. They can't keep that, like you're saying, belly fat or abdominal adiposity down. They're trying to move more, trying to eat less. So I think we want to kind of dive into that, because that is probably one of the biggest questions. And of course, there's so many factors and things that will tie into this, but just kind of for some metrics, I love to pull from the literature for our sessions here. But there was a longitudinal study, so meaning they followed women for several years going through perimenopause and into menopause. And what was interesting is they tracked their body fat percentage and saw that there was a lean mass loss of 0.5% every year, while they experienced an increase in fat mass by 1.7% per year. So their overall body weight was consistently increasing by 0.45 kilos a year. So there is this kind of trend that we see happen when individuals are even trying to, again, maintain the same amount of movement and maybe dietary intake. And we know that a lot of that has to do with changes in those hormones, estrogen and progesterone. So do you want to dive into the estrogen impacts on lean mass?
Well, one thing that I tell my clients is when we start working together is, let's not focus on the scale. Let's focus on, how you're feeling as far as lean body mass, especially around the midsection. So our goal is to, for a noticeable difference, in your midsection. So we want you to feel a little bit tighter. Let's not focus on the scale. Let's focus on that, because that's usually the main place that most women start to notice an increase in weight retention during this time. And a big reason is because perimenopause can drive insulin resistance. So decreasing estradiol, which is anabolic, can lead to lean mass losses. And with that, it comes a slowing resting metabolic rate. So the slight shift towards androgen excess can increase abdominal weight gain, which I just mentioned. So as estrogen declines, aromatase drives testosterone to estradiol within the cell, as well as can you say that, Kyla?
Androstenedione.
Yeah.
That's probably wrong too.
So women will experience similar symptoms as with PCOS. So, and then if we actually fall into true insulin resistance, it can worsen our menopausal symptoms.
So it's like a snowball effect. We get stuck into that situation, it can then worsen those symptoms. Now you're getting worse hot flashes, maybe worse weight gain with insulin resistance, things like that. So yeah, I mean, when we start to lose, well, I think we back up, like when we see our clients start to gain abdominal weight and they panic because they're like, everything I'm doing, is like, I didn't change anything, this weight's coming on. And then they want to go quickly into a big caloric deficit or, cut out all carbs or something like that to get some weight loss effect. And what can potentially end up happening is actually you might lose even more lean muscle tissue. And then now you've shifted that resting metabolic rate even lower. And then again, that creates that snowball effect as well. You don't have as much muscle tissue to grab that circulating glucose and put it into the muscle and manage that blood sugar response. You have, again, slower RMR. So it ends up leaning more towards storing that body fat, unfortunately. So one of the things we can kind of really rely on to support body composition and what we see to be effective for sure in I would say aging men and women, but definitely in menopausal and perimenopausal women as well is very effective, is getting enough protein in.
Yeah.
And I think, when I do, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, Kristin, is that when we do these nutrient analysis on a lot of our clients, we see vast majority of them are actually under consuming protein pretty significantly. So, and again, kind of as we get older, that what we're realizing is that there is a greater need for external sources to basically stimulate an anabolic response to build muscle. So because we don't have that high of circulating estradiol, as we mentioned, which is an anabolic, similar to testosterone, right? Anabolic, it's a builder. Because that is not as present, we need other outside sources to stimulate that anabolic response. And one of those things can be protein. The other one we can dive into is a form of exercise. But that's going to be a big piece of the puzzle. And so we do see, getting for sure a minimum of, we say 0.25 grams per kilo, even every 4 hours throughout the course of the day, can help minimize muscle breakdown. And if you're doing resistance training, which you should be, doing, 0.38 grams per kilo or greater can be an effective distribution throughout the course of the day as well to help minimize that lean mass loss.
Yeah, one thing I notice with my clients when I start working with them is most of them are under eating. They're still gaining that belly fat. However, they're severely low in calories. So usually I end up increasing the amount of calories they're taking in. I just shift their macronutrient profile quite a bit. And a lot of times that means adding in extra protein space throughout the day.
Yeah. I think that's a really helpful tool. And we see that too in the literature too, just across the board. I mean, if we can get, when it comes to supporting body composition and supporting lean mass and shifting that, we know for sure hitting your protein and doing some form of strength training, those are kind of the two top tier things. But then we see distributing that protein evenly throughout the course of the day is a bit more effective rather than consuming it maybe in like 2 meals of the day. So, and that helps too with satiety. So if you think about if your hunger cues are going a little crazy, especially if there is some insulin resistance going on, the blood sugar is not as stable, you might be more prone to cravings. If you get that protein in regularly, that can definitely help minimize hunger cues and increase satiety. And then let's see. So protein we know is a big one. Some other symptoms that can come with perimenopause and menopause. Brain fog is another one that we hear women talk about. Do you want to talk about that one a little bit, Kristin?
Yeah, well, the brain and the ovaries are linked to our neuroendocrine system. And so basically high estrogen equals high brain energy. So unfortunately, when our estrogen levels decline, our brain neurons slow down and they age faster, which can lead to cognitive decline. And so what we want to do is, support that decreasing estrogen level. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. Another one is lack of sleep. So when estrogen doesn't activate the brainstem, which plays a key role in our REM sleep, we have trouble sleeping. And I know a lot of women that I start working with, that's a key piece of the puzzle, and that can cause a lot of undue stress and training stress as well. We also experience mood swings. So when estrogen levels ebb, we get mood swings and we tend to forget things. So estrogen has been shown to increase serotonin and the number of serotonin receptors in the brain. So as estrogen decreases, so do our number of serotonin receptors, and serotonin are the feel-good chemicals in the brain. So we may notice, a little bit of downward mood swings, grumpiness, tiredness.
Yeah, I think too, people who maybe are listening or watching, if you are still having a regular menstrual cycle, I think some of these things some people might experience too, just with a regular menstrual cycle and that high hormone phase when estrogen and progesterone are fluctuating as well. So like I know clients who are having a regular menstrual cycle, they're in their late 20s, early 30s, but they get hot flashes right before they start their period. And that has to do with estrogen just plummeting. And that's definitely, again, that roller coaster that happens through perimenopause, where we tend to notice a bit more of those hot flashes or night sweats occurring. And it's typically because estrogen is dropping pretty significantly or quickly, as we mentioned. And kind of back on the topic and how this kind of all ties in full circle is we think about supporting body composition. And one of the best things to do to support your lean mass is get enough sleep. And that's because that's where that muscle tissue is repaired. We know getting enough sleep can help minimize caloric consumption the next day, help better manage stress. So if we think about ways that we can support the lean mass from a daily perspective, getting enough protein, getting protein regularly throughout the course of the day, then supporting our sleep to kind of further enhance that effect, I think is really important. And then of course the mood swings, if we can manage those as well. And we can talk about some tips on how to do that. So kind of through this perimenopausal process, at the end of the day, kind of the biggest things we're trying to work on from a nutrition perspective is really supporting progesterone as it's slowly declining, because that's going to be a big player in terms of brain health as well. Progesterone and estrogen kind of balance each other out in a sense. Estrogen being anabolic, progesterone being a little bit more catabolic, and then progesterone being you talk about estrogen affecting mood swings. Well, progesterone is the thing that can also help manage the mood swings, increase the GABA in the brain, cause a little bit more relaxed state. And so we really want to support progesterone as it's slowly declining, and then help essentially metabolize estrogen from the body the best we can. So a couple ways to support our progesterone and our estrogen really is minimize your alcohol intake. I know nobody wants to hear that one, but if we can minimize that alcohol intake, that does play a large role, because we know alcohol will impact our ability to repair and build muscle. It impacts our sleep quality, those kind of things. If you can manage your stress. So I think many of our clients, though, too, say that they use exercise as a way of managing their stress.
Yes.
So finding something that when it comes to training, training does elevate stress potentially, right? Depending on the type of training you're doing.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. Do you want to mention the type of training that can help or actually increases stress? Because I think that's important.
Well, I think, so the long distance, I think a lot of people that are listening to this are long distance endurance athletes. And, unfortunately, these long, not slower distance, but long exercise sessions, 2 hours plus, can really increase our cortisol levels, increase our stress response. So when I work with my athletes, especially ones that are training for marathons that are in the transition or perimenopause or even postmenopausal, I like to really switch up the training. Instead of, I want to decrease a lot of those slow intensity sessions, because they're not really giving our bodies the stimulus that we need, both for body composition wise and as far as reducing our stress and getting our estrogen kind of back into control. And so normally what I like to do is, obviously we do need to do the longer run to train for marathons, but then, adding in some higher intensity sessions throughout the week. And then also placing a really big importance on rest days, even more than when you were in your 20s and 30s and early 40s, is that rest is really important in between those days that you're stressing your body.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to the training stress thing, like mentioned, is, gosh, I think for the time going through school, I always was under the impression that the high intensity stuff was what increased cortisol and not the long steady state. So I think that might be news to some people. So I think it's good that we bring that up. So yeah, finding that balance and getting those, as we mentioned, there's a couple ways to get that anabolic stimuli. We mentioned protein, but the other piece is that training stress. If we can do some high intensity work, if we can lift some heavy weights, get that stimulus to the muscle tissue. Those are some of the best ways, the top ways. If you're doing one, great. If you're doing 2 or 3, those things we mentioned, it's just going to speed up that process even faster. And I think with a lot of endurance athletes, the strength training piece is maybe there for in the off season for a couple months, so making sure you keep that a regular thing that's happening, 2-3 times a week,
Yeah.
would be ideal.
I mean, I even tell some clients that want to work, that sign up for coaching with me, like they want to train for a race. And if they're, in this state of life, I always say, like, I will coach you. However, we will do strength training. And if you're not willing to do strength training, then it's really not worth my time. We have an increased injury risk. And athletes just tend to get frustrated. Our muscles are in a catabolic state, so we need to build those up. So you're not going to achieve your training goals without that, without the heavy lifting.
Yeah. I think that's super important. I think I see that too, is we get people that come to us that are endurance athletes and they enjoy the sport, but their body composition goals and the type of training they're doing does not match up with their body, what they want their body to look like, right? The types of things that they're doing might not sync up to get those effects, right? If they're doing a bunch of long steady state stuff and they think that it's going to result in the quote unquote toned look, when you're not stimulating muscle tissue, it's not, more than likely not going to give you the potential body that the individuals are looking for. And then of course, from a dietary perspective, some things again to further support that progesterone. We always want to make sure, of course, we're hitting all our vitamins and minerals, but the kind of big ones that will support progesterone are going to be zinc, our B vitamins, and vitamin C are going to be really important. And then when we think about things that can help with the metabolism of estrogen, we have vitamin B6 is really effective in that. That can also help too if you're someone who gets even like anxious leading up to the start of your cycle, or you notice your anxiety is a little bit worse. B6 can actually help a bit with that. And then our phytoestrogens, so specifically isoflavones and ligands, those are present in flax, sesame, apricots, legumes, dark chocolate are going to be great ways because those act similarly to estrogen in the body. And then fibers, of course, fibers can actually help bind with that excess estrogen, and then we basically poop it out. So if it's spiking up and it's getting processed through the liver and it's getting into the intestine, we can bind it up with a fiber source and evacuate it basically. And then we do know the sulforaphane rich, and I hope I don't mispronounce this, but the diindol methane DIM are also great sources to help with estrogen metabolism. And those are actually found in cruciferous veggies. So broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kale, things like that can help manage and minimize the high estrogen state as well. And then let's see, we have important, of course, too, managing inflammation. So if we're driving a kind of higher stressed state, we want to minimize that muscle tissue breakdown. There's some things we can include there. Definitely a lot of research leads towards the suggestion of like a Mediterranean diet, which I'm sure many of you maybe have already heard of. Reason being, it's rich in antioxidants. It's got all that fiber we just mentioned is important, magnesium. It's very rich in the anti-inflammatory omega-3 sources because there's quite a bit of seafood in the diet. So that can be a great tool as well to help with that. And then let's see, stress is a big one. Do you want to dive into that one, Kristin?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned this earlier, stress can drive down our estrogen levels. So cortisol and estrogen are inversely related. So as estrogen levels decrease, cortisol increases, our stress hormone. So as previously mentioned, long, moderate intensity workouts can just drive up our cortisol levels. And also fasted exercise. One thing that I think a lot of women first go to when they start to notice a little bit of weight gain is, well, I'm just not going to eat before my exercise session because, why take in calories? My goal is to burn calories. But studies show that just 4 days of fasted training in women can actually downregulate our thyroid and decrease our metabolic responses for burning fat. So basically, you're teaching your body not to burn fat, which is men don't have the same response. And so basically, we're decreasing our resting metabolic rate by this intermittent fasting or training in a fasted state. So it's actually counterintuitive to our body composition goals. And that's usually the first thing that I work on with clients is like, okay, step one, we need to fuel our training. We need to eat prior to our exercise sessions. You know, we want to get in some carbohydrates along with a little bit of protein as well to, you know, kind of start that process of muscle protein synthesis. And then also polarized training is also really important. Like I mentioned earlier, lifting heavy, estrogen is responsible for building lean mass. So we want to maintain that anabolic stimulus, and also the HIIT training. So we want to stress the body like our hormones used to. So we want to create that external stress through high intensity sessions. Short sessions with a little bit of rest in between can usually go a long way. So, you know, women don't need to go out and go for an hour and a half run. You know, we can get a really good stress response by doing a 20-minute high intensity session.
That's awesome. And I think the other piece of this as we get older is not just body composition, not just supporting performance, but our bone health is a big thing that we want to support. And I think many people, they say bone health and people probably automatically picture like yogurt and dairy products because of the calcium component. But some of the things we also know when it comes to bone health is actually your protein intake is a huge player in supporting actually your bone mineral density. And again, if we're not getting enough of that to support the lean mass, we're definitely not getting enough for the bone. So do make sure you're getting enough of that. And then of course, the other players into the bone health is going to be vitamin D, K2, those will help, as well as the calcium, as we mentioned, for bone health. So kind of on that note, I think if we want to kind of dive in, we did get some questions actually on Instagram from some people about this topic. So I thought we could kind of, I think we've probably answered them, but I think maybe we can give them a little summary version here. So we had two people kind of ask us similar questions, M. Richley and Sherry, how to avoid the inevitable weight gain and menopausal insomnia, or the combat the weight gain from changing hormones. You wanted to dive into that one or give a quick synopsis summary?
Well, you know, I think by changing our, increasing our protein amount, changing our type of exercise is huge. And then also with sleep, I think a huge thing is decreasing stress. You know, we want to get our bodies in a restful state before we hit the bed. I always tell my clients, screens off, you know, try for 30 minutes. If you can do more, read a good book, just get your body into a more restful state before you go to sleep. There are, you know, obviously there's herbs out there that are marketed towards menopausal, perimenopausal women to help. A lot of these herbs are stress relievers. I wait and work with a client individually to see, you know, because everyone responds differently to different forms of herbal remedies to reduce stress. So basically, you know, just getting your body tuned down at night so we can get sleep. While we sleep, our bodies repair, and then we're able to hit that next session and feel good.
Yeah. And then from like a tools perspective, like magnesium is great for helping with sleep. Getting magnesium in you before you go to bed, 200, 300 milligrams can be really helpful. And then tart cherry juice or capsules can be really effective as well to help with that sleep quality, help increase your body's own natural melatonin production that's being impacted by the fluctuating estrogen. So those tools can be helpful for women. And from a diet perspective, like these are all little things that we can do to mitigate. And like Kristin saying, working with someone individually is the best way to approach this, because, you know, tart cherry might not work for everybody, or might not make as big of a difference as someone might be hoping for. So kind of trying to work on, you know, the primary things, but from an individual perspective is always going to be helpful. And then we had mentioned, some of the other issues that can be going on, you know, whether it's more painful menstrual cramps, you know, as we mentioned, the anti-inflammatory component of like a Mediterranean diet and the omega-3s there, that can be really helpful for some women in minimizing menstrual cramp pain. Same with including the magnesium there as well. So, kind of working on potentially improving the, nutrients in the diet, and or if you need supplements to help support some of these things that are going on, and minimizing those issues will be helpful kind of get you through that process, right? And I think an important piece to mention too is that many women, maybe going through perimenopause for 12 years, and it can seem so daunting, and like that's going to be the rest of your life, and that you're going to be in a bad mood for the rest of your life, and you're going to have hot flashes, and that's not the case. It will normalize out, and we see literature, and many women actually feel even more positive or happier after, once they're in menopause. So you can definitely get through it. Find those dietary interventions first if you'd like, or of course there's the hormone therapy route with your PCP or OBGYN can definitely help with that situation as well if that's necessary. Let's see, anything to add to that, Kristin?
No.
Okay.
I think just letting women know that it is manageable. It can be a stressful and frustrating time, but there are things that can be done in order to, mitigate these symptoms.
Yeah. And I think kind of back on the insulin resistance part too, something to mention is shifting, maybe as an endurance athlete. I think we know for sure one of the things we see low, not just protein, is actually carbohydrate intake too for the individual, right? And so we know that's really important, but it's when there is the possibility of insulin resistance, making sure that those carbohydrate sources that you're choosing are whole grains, legumes, things like that. As long as you're not getting GI issues, of course, that are going to be a bit lower glycemic. Those can be, again, great sources, also very rich in fiber because they are low glycemic. This again can help with the metabolism of estrogen, as we mentioned. It'll bind in and then evacuate as bowel movement. So utilizing carbohydrates in that manner can be effective, as opposed to hitting your carbs from 100 grams of carbs from rice crackers or something like that. Try and get some whole grain, real food, closer to the real food form as you can, sources to hit your carbs. So I think many times we calculate carb requirements and people or hear the word carbs and they immediately think of like muffins and donuts and cake and, these maybe white processed carb sources, and really, carrots are carbs, and, butternut squash is carbs, and like these sweet potatoes, these are all great real food sources that people can choose for carbohydrates as well, to establish a better glycemic response as well, but still support their sport, because you do need carbs to perform as an athlete. So need those on board. All right, so I'm going to tie it up today. As a heads up, if you weren't aware already, we do have 2 ebooks on our site that are, but one is plant-based, the other is non-plant-based, but a menopause support programs. These includes a whole host of recipes that are rich in calcium, magnesium, protein, phytoestrogens. Goal here is we're helping to reduce those hot flashes, support the bone health, and maintain a healthy weight. So check those guys out if you're interested. We'll put them in the show notes, a link to those. And we will also include our references from today's webinar in the notes. So check those out if you guys want to do a little bit more reading of your own. And thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.